Good Friday evening, everybody. Welcome back to another video. And this is a late bloomer. So I'm finally going to give you all 20 movies that I watched in November. Yeah, I was definitely surprised at how many movies I watched in November. So I have a wide variety of movies that I watched, from horror to holiday movies to holiday horror to Scooby-Doo. Yeah, I'm not kidding. But there were a few more like sprinkled in between in here as well. So, without making this video too long, let's go ahead and get started with See No Evil, released in 2006. And this was a movie that I saw probably 2 or 3 times in my lifetime. And this is basically about a mentally challenged man by the name of Jacob Goodnight. And he was brought up by his extremely religious mother. So, the way this movie starts off, he is found and he has to go to like a hotel, and there's like this group of teenage youths in a detention center, and he hunts them down one by one. But if I'm not mistaken, I think there's like a cop that finds remains of one of his victims, and he's on like a path of revenge. So this is a pretty decent religious slasher horror, and it's kind of creepy. So he has like this thing with eyes. He always like removes the eyes from his victims. So not a very much talked about movie, but I definitely remember it. So that was See No Evil with Kane. So naturally, I watched See No Evil 2, which was directed by the Soska sisters. I'll put them right here, but they're pretty much known as horror mavens, if you will. I mean, they had like a game show called Hellevator that was on GSN, but they're more well known for the next movie I'm going to talk about. But this was the follow-up to See No Evil, and this takes place in a morgue, and Danielle Harris is your main girl, and it's her birthday, so she invites her friends to have a birthday party at the morgue. She's a mortician, that's why it's at a morgue. So they come across the corpse of Jacob Goodnight, and he comes back and takes everybody down one by one. I thought that this sequel was significantly better than the original. It's a pretty solid movie that I would definitely like to rewatch again. So that was See No Evil 2. which I believe was released in 2014 or something. So a very long wait. But the next movie I want to talk about is the Soska sisters' mainstream movie, American Mary. I don't know what this movie was. So essentially, you're following a medical student who's down on her luck, and there's like this woman who had like a ton of plastic surgery that offers her money to get better with like her school bills. So this woman basically made herself out to be Betty Boop. This movie was weird. And it wasn't really all that scary. It was just odd. I hardly even remember what even happened in this movie. But See No Evil 2 was better. But moving on from there, the first new release that I watched was Heretic. And this one was on everybody's radar in November. This is a religious horror movie starring Hugh Grant, and it's just him inviting these Mormon missionary women in his house, and they just talk about religion. So it's a thought-provoking movie that I found to be just okay. I wasn't as enamored to it as a lot of other people were. I guess because it was just way too smart for me. But this is dialogue heavy. I mean, lots of talking. And the climax was just very fantastical. I enjoyed this movie, but not as much as other people have. But Hugh Grant was definitely creepy in this one. So moving on from there, these next few movies are literally my childhood summed up. But the next movie I watched was Arachnophobia. Yeah, that one. So this was released in 1990, and it stars Jeff Daniels as a new doctor who comes into like the small California town, and there's like a string of mysterious deaths. Well, there's a new spider species on the loose. This movie is so much fun, but if you don't like spiders, I don't recommend it. But I've always loved this movie. Because creature features are clearly my thing, and we're getting a resurgence with vampires and werewolves, which I did see Werewolves today, and I'm going to film a review for it really soon. But back to Arachnophobia, there's just like a string of mysterious deaths that needs to be taken care of, and John Goodman is the exterminator, Delbert. He's honestly one of the best parts of this movie, and every time he's on the screen, I just like that dude. But Jeff Daniels is very likable, and when you get to like the climax where he's stuck in the basement and he just had like that giant spider crawling on him. I'm like, ugh. So, very fun movie, but very triggering to a lot of people who hate insects. Which, I mean, I don't have a problem with, but if they're all over me, I'm like, ugh, get away. But moving on from there, the next four movies are in the same universe. So, that first movie was Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. My all-time favorite Scooby-Doo movie, bar none. I ate this thing up as a kid, and it's the closest thing to horror for Scooby-Doo. So, Scooby and the gang are pretty much separated, and they're not really solving mysteries anymore because they think it's all fake until they get a call from this mysterious place in Louisiana. And they go to Moonscar Island, which has a very dark history. There were pirates that forced the villagers or colonizers or whatever they forced them to go into croc-infested waters. And they basically all died. And then they became zombies because of like a cat curse. So there's grotesque zombies, there's cat creatures, and there's ghosts in this movie. It's a very unsettling movie for a Scooby-Doo movie. I mean, I have Scooby-Doo socks on. Leave me alone. But I love this movie. I pretty much watch it maybe every 5 or so years. So, moving on from there, I watched Scooby-Doo Return to Zombie Island. And this one I rented. It was just okay. It just didn't capture that magic of the first one. So essentially, there's like this director who wants to remake Zombie Island. I mean, he found like lookalikes for your main three villains, and that's all I can really remember from this one. It was just okay. So, moving on from there, I watched another one that I watched all the time when I was growing up, but not as much as Zombie Island. This is Scooby-Doo and the Alien Invaders. Coming on a quarter of a century-year-old there next year. Yeah, this was released in 2000. So, this takes place in the Nevada desert, close to Area 51, and there's like these scientists who dress up as aliens, and they like steal oil, if I'm not mistaken. But then Shaggy and Scooby find their female counterparts and they fall in love with them. But it turns out they are the aliens. So, pretty solid twist, and it's got a very cute love song to it. So, I've always liked Alien Invaders. It's probably my third or fourth favorite animated Scooby-Doo movie. So it's pretty much in the middle there. But moving on from there, I finally did a first watch of Scoob from 2020. So, very different animation here. It's all computer generated. And this one was So essentially, this is how the Mystery Inc. gang met up, and they're basically teaming up with like Blue Falcon, which is like this superhero, and then there's like a super villain on the loose, and he kidnaps dogs or something. I really don't remember this one very much, so it was just okay. But moving on from there, I have a stretch of holiday movies. So I have the best Christmas pageant ever, and this one was actually really decent, and it's basically from the company behind The Chosen, which is like a religious thing. I don't know anything about it, but this is essentially about a town who puts on a Christmas pageant recreating the birth of Christ. So it's the 75th year for this pageant, and there's like a group of bad kids who wants to be a part of this pageant. And the townsfolk don't like that at all. But as you go throughout this movie, you realize these kids make the Christmas pageant more memorable and entertaining. So they just do their own thing. It's actually a pretty nostalgic movie that he could have seen from like the 80s, like A Christmas Story. It has that sort of vibe to it. So I really enjoyed it. Is it something that I'll put in rotation? Probably not. But for what it was pretty decent. Moving on from there, the most controversial movie of November, Red One. And I gotta say, definitely my type of movie. So, this stars The Rock, Chris Evans, Lucy Liu, and J.K. Simmons playing Santa Claus. Essentially, you have Santa Claus being kidnapped, and it's up to The Rock to team up with Chris Evans to bring him back. The villain in here is really not that memorable, but I like all the Krampus stuff. That was honestly more interesting than Gorilla the Christmas Witch. But $250 million for a very derivative, generic holiday action film. They probably could have made this for $100 million, and it definitely would have made a lot more money. But I thought that this was fine. It's not going to be a new favorite, but it's definitely my type of movie. So it was fun, but not really memorable. So moving on from there, switching to Thanksgiving, I have Pilgrim, which was on Hulu, and this one was a home invasion thriller taking place during Thanksgiving, where these actors take their job a little bit too seriously. I mean, they dress up as pilgrims and they just want the perfect Thanksgiving the way that it was meant to be when the first Thanksgiving happened. So they go all medieval and they turn into murderous people. This movie started off slow, but as you went through it, it's actually a pretty decent watch. So I actually really enjoyed it. So that was Pilgrim. Moving on from there, I have a first ever watch of Gladiator. Yeah. So definitely a very anticipated movie for me to finally watch, gearing up for its sequel. But Gladiator is the story of Maximus Decimus Meridius, a famous general who gets forced into slavery and he has to fight in the gladiatorial games under the rule of Commodus, played awesomely by Joaquin Phoenix. So Commodus was definitely a snobby villain in here. So nothing much else to talk about with Gladiator. I do have a dual review for Gladiator and Gladiator 2, but I really enjoyed this movie. And I'm surprised I haven't watched it as much as I have. The ending is definitely satisfying because Maximus got his revenge and he was able to see his wife and son in the afterlife. So 24 years later, Ridley Scott surprised us with Gladiator 2. And I had fun with this one, but it's just a big, dumb action movie. So, Paul Mescal is now the stand-in for Maximus, and he just doesn't have that staying power. I mean, how could you? So, Haru, I think was his name, or Hanu, whatever it is. He's also forced into slavery and he has to become a gladiator. But do you have more memorable gladiatorial sequences in here? You have like wolf monkey hybrid things. That's a blast. They filled the Colosseum up with water to recreate a famous battle with sharks. That's pretty fun. And then you have like a rhino just going toe to toe with the gladiators. This was actually a pretty brutal movie, which of course it should be. But I really did like Denzel Washington in here, and he is a formidable villain that you almost don't even see happen. But when it comes, he's definitely the villain. But then you have like these two twin emperors. I didn't really care for their characters, but they were just there. But I think Denzel Washington was the standout for this movie. But I really did enjoy this one, not as much as the first one. moving on from there was a movie that I never thought that I would watch and enjoy. This is Wicked Part 1. And the Part 1 is the most frustrating part. But this is based off of the Broadway musical of the same name. And this is the story about Glinda and Elphaba meeting for the very first time. Good Witch of the North and Wicked Witch of the West. So obviously a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, which is one of my favorite Golden Age Hollywood classics. This movie actually worked for me. It's grand. The musical numbers are pretty fun. That climax is awesome. And it makes me very excited for Part 2. So I have a full review on this one as well. But it's in consideration for one of my favorite movies of the year. It's probably going to be in the back half of my top 10 or 15. So I really enjoyed this movie. Moving on from there, I have another first time watch. Moana 2016. And this was a Disney film released in 2016. So it's not that old. And this is about a girl on an island of Montanui. I think I got that right. And she's destined to become like Queen of the Sea or something. And she has to go on this quest to find a demigod by the name of Maui, played by The Rock. Maui was the best part of this entire movie. So, thousands of years ago, he stole the heart of Te Fiji, and the heart needed to restore the island of Montanui before it becomes dried up. So Moana has to set sail to find Maui to bring the island back to its living state. This was a very solid movie, and it has some pretty good songs in it, but not very memorable songs. I mean, I'm a 90s Disney guy, so that's more my era, but I've never actually watched Frozen, so for Moana being a first-time watch, it was actually a pretty solid movie. But moving on from there, I naturally watched Moana 2, which was probably one of the highest grossing movies during the Thanksgiving weekend. There's no doubt in my mind that this movie is steadily climbing the box office charts. So, Moana 2 was basically continuing Moana's story. And this one really wasn't all that memorable to me. But Maui is in it more. So essentially, there's this bat woman villain thing that unfortunately you barely even get to see. And Moana is tasked with closing up this portal before it takes over the world. But she has like her companions with her, and they're charming enough. But to me, I found this movie not to be as fun as the original. I found it to be kind of like a retread of the original, in my opinion. So, this one was just okay. Moving on from there, I have 3 more movies. And I watched Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving. And I already talked about this movie 3 times, including tonight. So, this was a Thanksgiving slasher directed by Eli Roth, and it released last November. And it's just like your classic 90s throwback slasher, and you have like a killer pilgrim on the loose. So, this said pilgrim is on revenge after a horrific massacre during a Black Friday tragedy. And this was my 3rd time watching this, and I still have fun with this movie. So, very festive kills in here, and that dinner scene is very horrific. But I definitely cannot wait for the sequel next year. And for a Grindhouse trailer, this movie really works. It's a very fun movie. I mean, it might not be the best of the best, because the characters need a little bit of work, but it's still a very enjoyable slasher. And it just makes you want to watch Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving. So that was that. And moving on from there, I watched Don't Move, which is a Netflix original movie. And this was about a woman on the brink of suicide after losing her husband and son. Well, Finn Whitrock comes in and he wants to console her, but it turns out he's a psychopath. So he literally sticks a needle in her, causing her to be paralyzed. So this is just like a cat and mouse thriller that's 90 minutes, where you just see this girl being held against her will, paralyzed to do nothing. So she just sits there and waits for it to subside. This movie was actually very surprising and definitely a pretty good Netflix movie. Now, Netflix and me, I hardly watch Netflix movies because I think that they're throwaway movies, if you will. But when it comes to a simple thriller, I'll throw it on. But when they have movies like Rebel Moon, I just have no interest at all. But that was Don't Move, and we are on to our last and final movie in November. I did a rewatch of P2. That's the name of this movie. So this is another thriller that's set on Christmas Eve. And it's about this woman leaving for her Christmas Eve party, but she basically gets trapped in a parking garage, and there's this crazy security guard after her. That's the whole movie. I think Wes Bentley definitely plays a good psychopath, and this is overall a very tense but very fun movie. Very highly underrated, and not a lot of people talk about this movie. So that was P2. And those are the 20 movies that I watched in November. So, I've already watched a few movies to start off this month, and I actually did see my first new release today. That was Werewolves, and I'll have a review out for that tomorrow. So, that's all I got for this video. And I also plan on seeing Y2K tomorrow as well. So, you'll definitely get a couple more reviews after this video. But I'm going to send you guys off, and I'm going to go to bed. Adios. Peace.